Hey everyone, welcome to the UFO Hub live stream. Today's guest is going to be Charles Michael Beaver. He goes by Mike, and here in a bit, I'm going to be asking him to get a little bit into his background and information. But before that, I just would like to cover a few things. So the conference, Ozark Mountain UFO Conference, went well. There was in person, it was great, and of course, on my end, we had some of the streaming issues, but it got worked out the following day. The hotel was great. They responded to whatever we were asking, but the telephone company were, I guess, a little bit more hesitant. I guess, wasn't persuasive enough to show them that it was their line that's the problem, and not something, let's say, like our equipment or whatnot. But anyway, we worked it all out. And if some of you that are watching were there, I'm sorry if I didn't see you. You should have come up and said hello. The other part is I'm sounding a little bit raspier than usual. That's because I'm getting over a cold, so that explains that. And as always, after we're done with the interview, we're going to open it up for some Q&A. And I'm basically going to ask you that are watching on YouTube and Twitch, if you're submitting a question, please make sure to use 3 asterisks before the question, because that means it's a question directed for Mike and not just some random chatter that you guys are having in the chat rooms. If you would like to talk to Mike directly and ask a question, join the Telegram group that's also going on live right now. Telegram is voice only and you can only listen, but when the time comes, there's a little button where you raise your hand, and I'll add you to my queue to then have you come in and ask a question. So I think that pretty much covers all that part. And I guess without any further ado, let me bring in Mike. Welcome, Mike. Thanks for being on. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on your show. This is a pleasure.
Well, I'm glad this worked out for us. Originally, we've had this. Actually, Mike reached out to me a lot sooner. It was like maybe in February or so. But I was just so busy with the conference coming up and all kinds of other things. I just asked, would April work, and he agreed. So I was happy that that interview didn't get lost. So, Mike, I figured if we can get a little bit into your background information, and we'll start out with that, and then we'll cover some other subjects later on.
Well, professionally, I'm an IT geek. I work with computers, information technology. I've been doing that I've been touching computers for over 41 years. Professional for close to around 30 years. I started out in the days of the mainframe when that was all that existed. In junior high, and then I've done everything you can imagine. My customers include the CIA, the FBI, Library of Congress, DISA, DSS, a lot of oil companies, let's see, just all kinds of organizations. I sat in the room with, do you remember David Petraeus?
I can't say I do. Was he a general or something?
Yeah, he was the 4-star that ran the Afghan conflict. So his daily briefing, I was in the middle of that. I sat in there with 10 generals. There was General Rodriguez was a 2 or 3-star underneath Petraeus, and he ran the day-to-day conflict of the Afghan war. So I've worked in Afghanistan several times, and in one of those, my customer was NATO, and I was sitting in the war room with General Rodriguez and about 8 or 9 other generals, and watching like 20, 30 drone feeds go through Raytheon servers and being projected up on a wall. That's one of the jobs I had. And another one, I worked at the world's largest training center of any kind, the Army Medical Department Center School. I worked with another fellow, and we stopped a congressional investigation. That was something Donald Trump couldn't even do as the president, but me and this other fellow actually stopped a congressional investigation together. That's another thing I did. Anyway, I used to be a hypnotherapist. As a hypnotherapist, I worked with one abductee who had 72 encounters with the Greys, 24 implantations, 24 checkups, and 24 removals. She was used as a breeder. She came to me for back pain and obesity, and I worked with her as a hypnotherapist. I also worked with another guy to help him remove an attaching spirit he had. I worked as a stuntman in the movie industry, falling off buildings, doing car hits and bullet hits and things like that. What else have I done? I've been a ufologist. I've known several of the founders of MUFON. John Schuessler, one of the founders, investigated me, my encounters back in the early days. Around the time that the Cash Lanham case, he released that to the public that he was investigating. Around that time is when he was investigating my stuff. I knew Peter Davenport. I don't know if you know who he is.
I do.
With New Fork. I used to go to his meetings. I've been around ufology for my whole life. My first encounter was October 3rd, 1980. I've got a book that is unpublished, and I think that is probably all of the, that's a short. I'm a contactee. I'm not an abductee. And I've had encounters with craft, more than a half a dozen, and two or three encounters with creatures, but I've never been abducted or taken on board a craft or anything of that nature. And the beings I saw were not like any of the ones that people talk about, but the free report mentions the kind of things that I saw, but it's not the ones that people talk about. It's really odd that the ones most people see are the ones that are least talked about, and it's odd. Anyway, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, Mike, thanks for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I had a chance to interview. Oh, now I forgot his name. Davenport. What's the first name?
Peter Davenport.
Peter Davenport, and it was funny because he sat down. We were kind of talking, and I had a release form at that time. I was doing release forms, and I guess it just got him nervous or hesitant. And he said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." And he just kind of got up and walked out. But I would have loved to have an interview with him. So
well, he had some interesting people come to his meetings. He had a fellow come there that talked about the Phoenix lights, and the guy was like on the freeway driving along, and the craft that is mentioned for the Phoenix lights was like moving parallel with him down the freeway, and then he made a turn, and the craft kind of turned, and it's like it was moving around. It wasn't just stationary like you hear. Everybody talks about it being stationary in the sky, but it wasn't. It moved around a lot. So anyway, he had a lot of very interesting people. There was a lady who talked at one of his meetings that was privy to the Blue Book. She was working as a secretary for the military when Blue Book was going on, and she talked about that. And it was an interesting group of people to get together with, until he stopped having them because he lost a lot of money investing in one of the. He had to pay decent amount of money for this place he was renting to have the meetings, and he got kind of lost a lot of money one time, and he decided not to have the meetings anymore after that. So.
right, yeah, that's understandable, especially venues before or after the pandemic were always a difficult thing to get. So, Mike, I guess because you and I we talked a little bit, and we know how much you have to cover regarding spirit attachment and some of the other subjects. So I figured I'll let you get into that, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I have two attaching spirits. I have one that sits on my head and one that sits on my back. They're both demonic, and so I was sitting across there was a girl I used to go over to her apartment. She was into doing the out-of-body thing with Robert. Remember, have you ever tried Robert Monroe's tapes? Have you ever listened to his hemispheric synchronization tapes? Have you ever listened to those?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, they were the first hemisync technology to hit the mass market. and they were on just audio tape. And I would take a copy I had over there with a headset, with some headphones, and I'd lay down on a couch and try to get out of my body. This was in a group, she had 8 or 10 people, plus or minus a few, at her apartment. Everybody's trying to get out of their body using these Robert Monroe journey tapes. And after we did that, and we're all done and everybody's gone, I would be sitting there talking to her. She'd be sitting on the other side of this card table, and she looked up at me and she said, you have an imp jumping around on the top of your head. And I was like, yes, I know that. And it was at that moment, jumping around on the top of my head. It's never done that before or since. It's usually stationary. It never moves around. But at that moment, it was jumping around. So I knew she could see it because she described it and what it was doing it also at the same time. So also I was in Portland, Oregon, and I was actually in a jail cell with a fellow, and I was meditating. I was sitting in semi-lotus on the concrete floor in the jail cell. It was like on the 6th floor of this building, and he's my cellmate. He's sitting on the bottom bunk, looking at me or just looking out, and I'm sitting there doing Kriya Yoga and bowing forward and doing side to side and then coming up, and you're cycling your consciousness through your body to get your chi flowing. You put your mind on your crown and also split it between there and your different chakras in your body, energy points. And I was doing that, and when I finished, I opened my eyes and I looked over at him, and he says, "You realize you have a demon sticking its tail in your back?" And at that time, I wasn't, unlike the girl, I wasn't aware that I had an attaching spirit on my back. I was only familiar with the one on my head. But when he said that, I could feel the sharp pain sticking in my back, and I moved my awareness there to notice the sharp pain. And as I'm focusing my awareness on that sharp pain, I can also feel the energy around the sharp pain on the surface of my skin in that location of my back. And noticing that signature, in addition to the sharp pain, I realized that he was correct, that I also had an additional attaching spirit on my back. And so I realized he was telling the truth. And I said to him, yeah, I can feel it. And so those are the two people that come to my mind when you ask me, has anybody seen your attaching spirit? Those two people are the first ones that come to my mind. But other people have seen them as well. Nobody has seen that fellow in that jail cell is the only one who's seen the one on my back, but other people have seen the one on my head. But I can't remember who they were and where those other events are or happened. So anyway, I'd been trying to get rid of my attaching spirits for a while. My wife and I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I was looking through the penny ads, and I looking for a healer. And so I saw this ad for a healer, and I called this lady up and I told her my issue with my attaching spirit, and she said, well, come on down to where I'm at. She gave me her address, and she lived with her husband in Southern Oregon, and Portland, where I lived, is on the northern edge of Oregon. It's right on the border of Washington State. And so my wife and I went in our car from Portland down to Southern Oregon, and we walked in this lady's, parked the car, pulled on this couple's lot out in the middle of nowhere, and got out of the car and walked into her and her husband's double wide and mobile home. And we looked over at her and her husband, and she looks over at me and she points her finger at me and goes, "You're healed." And I looked at her, and in my mind, I was thinking, "You idiot!" and and I knew she couldn't heal me. That there's nobody who has that. Well, nobody I've met who has that kind of power, and so I knew she was deluding herself. But um, she wasn't trying to delude me. She just had that belief in herself. So anyway, my wife and I hung around at her and her husband's uh, um, piece of land for that day. I rode around on his motorcycle once, and anyway, nothing happened of any note while we were there. But then we left and went back home up to northern Oregon, up to Portland, and then 2 to 6 weeks later, she calls me and says, when I get on the phone with her, she says, "I talked to my psychic friend about your issue." And I said, "Yeah." And she said that you got it from smoking, but I didn't see you smoke. Do you smoke? And her friend didn't tell her smoking what. She just said smoking, and she assumed that her friend was talking about cigarettes. And I said to her, "I've smoked 2 cigarettes in my entire life, but your friend is correct. I stayed high on pot morning, noon, and night for 18 years, from the age of 16 to the age of 34. And so, yeah, I've smoked all my life, but it's not cigarettes." And so I realized at that moment that I acquired my attaching spirits by smoking marijuana morning, noon, and night for 18 years, from the age of 16 to the age of 34. So, moving on, let me think about this for a second, where I should go next. Okay, um, so I'm going to jump forward to I was um, I worked in Afghanistan for several different times, and then the last time I was over there, I had a run-in with my site supervisor, and he fired me, and I got in order to get your tax break, um, you have to be out of the country for 285 days of that year to get your tax break, and he fired me like 16 days short of that 285-day minimum for the tax break. So when I got back in the United States, I had to go back out of the country for another 16 days to get the tax break. So I tried to get my wife to go to Greece, but she doesn't. She's afraid of flying over the ocean. So instead of going to Greece, I went to Peru and did the ayahuasca for several times, and that opened me up to um, being psychic. I was, for 2 years of my life, from the time I did the ayahuasca 3 times uh, outside of Iquitos, Peru, in the jungle, Peruvian jungle. For 2 years after that, I was open psychically tremendously, like a super psychic, and I could see like the darkness, all kinds of. It's really odd. Um, Hold on one second. I'm gonna shut my door. My dog just opened the door.
Okay.
So all the noise from my wife's TV is coming through the door. So so when I say I was like a super psychic, when you're that open psychically, it's not just that you, it's not that just you're psychic, but it's also that this the barriers between you and what's outside of you are thinner. So you're not just seeing the darkness better, much better, but the darkness is seeing you as well, much better. And it's like wanting to come at you. And so, like I'd be in my apartment and I'd hear knocking or I guess my wife could hear it too, but it would be this pounding like something was trying to get in to the room, but it's outside. The noise is coming from outside the room, and I'd be my wife and I'd be in bed trying to sleep, and we'd be half asleep and half awake, and our two dogs would be in the bed with us, and things, just all kinds of strange things would happen. But one of the ones I remember was it would be like a hand grenade going off in the living room. And, I mean, a real loud explosion. And the dogs would jump up and start barking their heads off, right? And so I get up and I go in the living room, and there's nothing in there. There's no, it wasn't like a pounding on the floor, on the wall. It was just a huge, very loud explosion. And there's nothing in there to cause that. And things like that would happen, and a lot worse than that would happen happened to me and my wife for 2 years. And it wasn't just something in my head. When I say the barriers were less, I'm not just saying in my head I'm more psychic. I'm saying the barriers around me. You have layers of energy that hug your body, that are literally touching your body, and you have layers on top of those going out way beyond the room that you're in. And so, anyway, the marijuana made Swiss cheese out of the barriers that are immediately around me, which let the attaching spirits come in, and then the DMT, the psychic part, the psychedelic DMT that's part of the ayahuasca, the active part of the ayahuasca, opened up other barriers that are further out from my body that allowed these other things to happen. And so there's a lot more to that, but I'm not going to give you everything. My wife she got possessed one day, and I almost spent 2 years in jail because I confined her to a space because she wasn't in control of her body. Her eyes were going black and red and white, rolling up on the top of her head, and she was frozen standing there for like I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and I confined her to a space, and I almost spent 2 years in prison because of it. I'll skip over that event though. That's like an hour-long event. So anyway, basically, if you read the title of my book, you understand what I believe about attaching spirits. I believe that everybody has, that most everybody, all humans, have two or more attaching spirits. And I believe, just like the title of the book states, I'll read you the title of the book. It's called Instruments of Control. It's unpublished. Instruments of Control: How Attaching Spirits Cause War, Terrorism, Crime, Racism, Murder, Insanity, Mental Illness, Molestation, Marital Discord, Suicide, and many other illnesses, and are leading humanity to its fourth impending fall. So basically, I'm trying to say that my belief is that dark spirits, attaching spirits, cause all the problems on this planet. And so there was something I was about to say it, and I lost my train of thought. Anyway, let's see, 1 second here. I'm going to think about this for a second. Oh yeah, so 1 second. I'm going through my notes because I want to not miss anything. So in addition to the two people I just mentioned that have seen my attaching spirits, there was a person. I was working for the Air Force at Wilford Hall. The Air Force's, at one time it was the Air Force's largest medical facility, and there was a fellow there, very technical fellow there, that I met at lunch, and we shook hands and sat down, and his dad was an exorcist, or is an exorcist if he's still alive, and he would help his dad hold people down while he was exercising them. And he said, after we sat down, he said, I told him basically about my attaching spirits. That's almost the first thing I said to him at this lunch meeting that we had. We were talking about all kinds of, he told me about his dad and all that. And he said the moment he shook my hand that he knew I had issues with attaching spirits, though he didn't say it exactly like that. So he's the third person that could verify that I have something going on. Now, there are a bunch of people, in addition to the people who've seen my attaching spirits, during the 2 years I was psychically opened up like a can with a can opener. There were many times I saw other people's issues. Now, I've only seen one attaching spirit directly. I was, during that 2 year period, I was standing in Manassas. When I came back to the United States from that war zone in Afghanistan after going to Peru I came back, stopped at my mother's, and then went to Peru for another 19 days to cover the taxes. Took the ayahuasca several times. It opened me up. And then when I came back again in the United States, my wife was living in Manassas, Virginia. And so that apartment we lived in Manassas was the most psychically active apartment I've ever been in my life. And I was standing, there was a lady at the on the other end of this same building I was in who had all these religious symbols, crosses, and pictures of Jesus and stuff. She came home one day, front door was open, or she walked in her apartment, and all of her crosses and everything were turned upside down while she was going to work. So it was a very dark property. So anyway, I was standing outside this apartment building in the courtyard one day, and this lady, she had lupus, and I have a feeling that lupus was caused by her attaching spirits. But I think she had a jinn, not a demon or a human attachment, but a jinn. And the reason why I say that is because, hold on a second, I'm going to shut my door again. My dog keeps coming in and opening it.
There we go. I was muted. For those of you joining just now, Mike was just basically expounding on the different attaching spirits and the different experiences he's had. I just wanted to interject and use this opportunity to let you all know later on when we do some question and answers. Please make sure to, if you're commenting on YouTube or Twitch, to use 3 asterisks before your question, so that way I know it's directed towards Mike. There's also a Telegram voice chat going on right now where you can also listen to this interview at the moment. And if you would like to ask a question directly, that would be your chance, because there's an option where you can raise your hand and then you can ask the question of Mike yourself. So let me get back to Mike here. All right, Mike. Sorry, I had to just figure I'd use the chance to do this real quick. So please continue where you had left off.
Okay, so it's in broad daylight. This lady is standing about 6 feet from me, and this is the only time I've ever seen somebody's attaching spirit. So she and I are talking, and this spirit that's within her came straight off her back, straight up off her body, like straight up in the air, and then it moved at me very quickly. But it looked like a long time ago we used to have. There were cartoons where you saw jinn, like I Dream of Jeannie, but not. We used to picture jinn like men who were over muscled men that were bigger than life, and you wouldn't see their lower body, but you'd only see their upper body from like the waist up, and they'd be like super muscle bound, a man with a turban on. And it was a cartoon that was representing what jinn are supposed to look like. And that's what this thing looked like. I didn't see a turban on its head, but it would look like a male human that was super muscle bound and large. But I was only seeing it psychically. If you were standing right next to me, you might not have seen what I saw. So I was seeing it with my mind's eye. So it goes straight up off her body, and then I look at it just for a second or less, and then it moves at me really quick. And I move backwards instinctively, and I almost fall down after taking a step because it scares me enough where I move backwards. That's the only attaching spirit I've ever seen in my life. Now, in that same corridor, or one of the other corridors in that same apartment complex, there was this little girl who was probably, I'd say she was like somewhere between 4 and 6. She's probably 4 or 5 years old, and she was holding the leash of a very cute little. It was a bulldog puppy, and the puppy was like angry. It was like barking at me and wanting to bite me or something. And she's like having a hard time holding on to it because she's such a little girl. And luckily, it was just a baby dog. It was a puppy. So, but she was still having a hard time holding it because she was just a little girl, right? And when I looked at her eyes were moving around really fast in her head. And I knew somehow that wasn't her physical eyes. I was seeing like her astral body or causal body or mental body or some other part of her that wasn't her physical body. And but I also knew from seeing her eyes moving around really fast in her head that she had an attaching spirit. That's what her eyes moving around really fast. That's what that meant. That she had an attaching spirit. So around that same time frame, I was being psychically attacked in my apartment, and a lot. But one day I was walking down the street, and this was like the day before or the day of when I did I call it my wife's exorcism, but it wasn't really an exorcism. It was I just confined her to a space because she was totally being controlled by some one or more spirits, and she wasn't in control of her body. But that day or the day before, I was walking on the street because I just was the spirit the attacks of my person by spirits in that apartment were just driving me to leave the apartment. So I just put a bunch of stuff in my pocket, and I was going to leave permanently. And so I just walked like an hour and a half away from the apartment or more, and just kept walking. And I finally sat down and sat there for an hour, and then turned around and went back to the apartment. But I was gone for like 6 hours. And but when I was coming back to the apartment, I was looking around at all the people on the street, and everybody's eyes were jumping around in their heads, just like the little girls. Every person on the street, everybody in the car, everybody walking down the street, everybody was like that. And then another time, and about that same time frame, because of some issues with my wife and I had to go see a judge, and I was sitting in this courthouse corridor outside the courtroom on a wooden bench that lined this really long hallway on both sides of the hallway, and people were sitting. The judge's doors were shut. He was doing his preliminary stuff, and the things he does before he sees anybody. And everybody in the hallway is waiting on him. The door to courtroom to open up. So there's a whole boatload of people sitting on these wooden benches lining this really long hallway on both sides of the hallway. And I looked at everybody, and about 1 in 3 or 4 people had their eyes jumping around in their heads, and the rest of the people were just normal. And I knew intuitively that all the people who had their eyes jumping around, they had attaching spirits, and they were also the ones that were going before the judge who had committed a crime or were accused of committing a crime, like myself. And the rest of the people were their friends or relatives or lawyers there to assist them. And they didn't have, the people that were accused had the attaching spirits, and the people who were not accused did not have attaching spirits. So let's see what else. I've already talked about my wife and me in Portland, and so the one that sits in my head, it sits generally, the cowlick part of your head is where it sits, and it can be spread out across the top of my head, but it generally sits, I can feel it almost always at the back of the top of my head, where the back of my head meets the top of my head. It's called the cowlick, and it's just above your, what's called your default motor network part of your brain. And so it's always there in that one spot, but the one on my back moves around all over the place, and I don't feel it very often, but the one on my head I feel all the time. And so if you have a sharp back pain and it stays in one spot and it never moves around, you like have a slip disc, a compressed spine, a broken something, torn something, it's all physical. That's all physical, and it stays in one spot. It never moves. That's having to do with your spine or something in a particular spot of your back. That's a normal back pain. However, if you have a sharp back pain and it moves around on your back and doesn't stay in one spot, that's an attaching spirit. Similarly, with a head pain, like a headache, if you have a headache that's more localized, it's not spread out very far, and you stick your hand on that spot on your head, and your the pain, your headache goes away while your hand is sitting there. You take your hand off, it comes back. You put your hand on there, on that spot, it goes away. You take your hand off, it comes back. And let's say you put your hand on again, and your pain goes away, but you can feel the energy on the outside of your hand, maybe on the side of your hand or on the top of your hand. That's an attaching spirit. So I'm just trying to let people know how they can tell the difference between a normal headache or a normal back pain and an attaching spirit. So there are some technologies that can be used to see ghosts. Like, have you ever been to a ghost hunt?
Yes, several times.
Okay. Are you aware that zero lux cameras can see ghosts in real time?
No, I don't know any of the technical aspects. I just know the tours and some actual ghost hunts that were done by people that's pretty much their living. I've only partaken in that way, but not necessarily playing with any of the technology that they use.
Well, I went on a ghost hunt up in Skycomish, Washington. If you look on a map, you'll find a city called Snohomish, Washington. And most maps don't have Skycomish, Washington. They only have Snohomish, Washington. But Skycomish, Washington is very close to Snohomish, Washington. Okay, Skycomish, Washington is literally a ghost town. They have no power in the town except there's one hotel that has power. I don't know how it gets power because the municipality has no power. So they must have, I don't know if they have generators or not because you can't hear the generators running. So I don't know how that building gets power. But this building, this one hotel has power. And so people go to the hotel to have a ghost experience, to do ghost hunts. So when we went there, there's a mountain next to that city, and back in I don't know if it's the late 1800s or early 1900s, there was um, a train that went through this train tunnel that goes through this mountain. It's like a half a mile. It's either somewhere between a quarter and a half a mile long tunnel through this mountain, and the train goes through it, and um, and so the train was in there one year, and it was snowing heavily, and they stopped in the tunnel to get away from the snow, and when they tried to get out of the tunnel with the train, it got part of the way out and got stuck, and it's sitting there chugging, making its noise and vibration and stuff, and it caused an avalanche, and that avalanche killed like maybe a third to half the people on the train, and most of the people or half the people in the city. It wiped out the town and it wiped out the train, and it didn't kill everybody, but it killed a lot of people. And when you talk about that, people hear the story and they're like, no, that's just a story that didn't really happen. But I have photos on my website, profoundstates.com, that beg to differ, because there's still huge chunks of rebar hanging from one end of this train tunnel, where it's evidence that yes, there was a avalanche that killed a lot of people and knocked out the end of that tunnel, and so so I was able to photograph a lot of orbs and stuff there. And anyway, I remember now why I brought it up. So there was one point where I was standing behind this one ufologist who was also a paranormal researcher. She's got a Sony Zero Lux camera. They had just come out the week before, and so this orb. By the way, if you're a ghost, you're either seen as an ectoplasm or an orb. And so this orb or slash ghost came flying over us. And I'm not a psychic. All these ladies I was with are all psychic. And so they were seeing the ghost left and right. Even when it was pitch dark, they could see it. And I couldn't see them because I'm not that psychic. I am psychic, but not that psychic. And so I'm standing behind this lady with this Sony Zero Lux camera, and this orb comes flying over us and comes down in front of us, in front of her camera, and she picks it up, and or the camera picks it up, and it starts flying in an orb in the shape of a infinity sign in front of the camera.
Excuse me, just one quick second. I'm sorry, Mike. Is there any way then maybe the music you're playing in the background, because I might get a strike because it's coming through YouTube.
Yeah, it's my wife. She used to have
okay.
her music in the
That's
room.
all right. So I guess while Mike does this also, hopefully make this adjustment, because usually YouTube thinks that I'm then playing some copyright music, and then I'd hate to get a strike for no reason. Anyway, also, just real quick, if I haven't said this already, in the description, I have all the links that Mike has provided for me. So I certainly hope that either throughout the interview or after the interview, you go and check those out. It basically gave me the link to his website, link to the unpublished, well, not the entire book, but just a section of it, link to his YouTube channel. And I always encourage everyone else watching to certainly check it out. All right, Mike. Looks like you're back. Let me unmute you again. Thanks for that. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
my dog was scratching at the door, and my wife opened the door so the dog could come in, and then she comes in, and then, of course, her music from the TV in the living room
All
comes
right.
through the door. So anyway,
All right. Well, thanks for that.
us
I'm sorry. So please continue if you remember where you left off.
I
It w-
do. So I'm standing behind this lady with a Sony Zero Lux camera, and the orb flies in front of it, and it does starts flying in a figure eight formation. And so I knew that bugs don't fly in figure infinity sign formation. So I knew that was not a bug. Plus, you wouldn't see a bug in the dark like that anyway. It would just be you wouldn't be able to see it. And so, anyway, that's a ghost. So I don't even know why I brought that up, other than we were
it was
talking
something about the
about.
camera that you were asking me about the camera, and it picks up something. I'm sorry, I can't recall what you were
Well,
saying
I
it was.
asked you if you were aware that cameras could see ghosts live. Okay, and the reason why I brought that up, one of the reasons was because there is a book written by a priest that talks about um, a camera that's supposedly developed by NASA, somebody working for NASA, and I um, I think, let's see, the book is called NASA, the Aura, and Holy Communion, and or at least the website that talks about it is named that. Anyway, I have a dream about the future, and my dream is regarding attaching spirits that at some point uh, I will be in a meeting, like say a MUFON meeting or some other kind of meeting, and I'll be sitting in a chair on stage or not on stage in front of a group of people, and they'll be sitting in the crowd, and I will invite them. I'll tell them all these things that I'm telling you, and then I'll invite them to come up and put their hand on my head. See, my wife, a long time ago, I invited her to put her hand on the top of my head so she could feel the energy of my attaching spirit. And she did that. She put her hand on the top of my head and she could feel the energy of my attaching spirit that sits there. She could feel its tingling under her hand. And she said it was the strangest thing she'd ever felt. And so I figured in the future, if I can get enough people together who want to prove to the world that attaching spirits are real, not that they might be real or they possibly are real, but they are for sure real, then we could videotape that, video record that, and stream it to YouTube or whatever. And people would come up and stand behind me and stick their head out, their hand out, arm out to the left side of my head. I would grab their hand and then stick it on the top of my head, and they would close their eyes and they would have like 30 seconds or maybe a whole minute to close their eyes and focus and see if they can feel anything from the bottom side of their hand, to see if they can feel the energy from the attaching spirit. And it would all be recorded. And if they had any special reaction, facial reaction, that, you know, this would be some level of proof to people that attaching spirits are real. And then from there, going forward, we would have a couple contests to see if anybody, you know, we would crowdfund the development of a camera that could see not just ghosts like the one I mentioned before, but actual attaching spirits. Now, if NASA did create, or somebody working for NASA did invent a camera that already exists that can see attaching spirits, which this book claims is already exists. I've researched it. I've not found any reference from NASA or anyone else aside from this book that this is true. But if it is true, then one of the things I was hoping to happen in the future, the creation of technology that can actually see attaching spirits, that may already exist. If it doesn't, then we need to crowdfund the invention of it. Okay. And another thing we need to crowdfund is a contest to see who has the best exorcism technique that can be taught to the masses. So if we can come up with a technology that can see attaching spirits, and we can also, if it doesn't already exist, and also come up with a technique that anybody can learn to remove attaching spirits, that's easy to learn and that works. If we can come up with both of those and then prove that they exist scientifically, and move the needle forward to, like, you were an Art Bell fan, right?
Yeah, I love Coast to Coast in general.
Okay. So you remember how he moved the needle forward about UFOs, right?
Please explain. I'm not following.
Well, do you remember when he interviewed there was two airline crews that saw the same UFO at the same time? You remember that?
I've listened to a lot. I don't remember that particular episode.
Okay. Do you remember there was a UFO that was chased across 6 different counties by 6 different police departments? Do you
Yes,
remember
that
that?
I remember. Yeah.
Okay. So he interviewed those police. So that moved the needle forward in the sense that he's helping to prove that aliens that alien craft are coming to the planet, and it's not just crazy people seeing them. He moved that needle forward. Okay. And so this when CNN, when the Times report came out about they mentioned ATIP, and it was a mistake. I think Leslie Keane wrote this article for the New York Times talking about ATIP and their investigations into UFOs, and the story that was written in the New York Times that broke all this information out to the public a year or two ago. The story was mostly correct, but there was one mistake in there, and that was it wasn't ATIP, it was OSAP, and that had to do um, with Robert Bigelow's Skinwalker Ranch. It's now owned by Brandon Fugel. So OSAP investigated not only the UFOs appearing over the Skinwalker Ranch, but the Skinwalkers and all the paranormal things that happen around UFOs. And so the DIA investigated that out of the Pentagon for several years, and it was paid for by the DIA. And that leads me to another event that happened to me. My belief is that the Skinwalkers, they're real, and they're on Earth, and they are trapped between Earth and the astral plane. So when the original owner of the Skinwalker Ranch that sold it to Robert Bigelow saw the wolf and chased after it in the snow with his son and his rifles and stuff, and shot it and everything, and it disappeared into nowhere, and just like it got like beamed up into a spacecraft kind of thing. It was basically going from the Earth to the astral plane, right? So astral beings can, some physical beings can go to the astral plane, and astral beings can come to the physical plane. And so when I was in a Washington D.C. A park, one of the 2 or 3 parks that my wife and I used to go to that are near Washington D.C., south of Washington D.C. We used to go up there. One day we were walking through this park, and I felt a pain in my left pointing finger, on the right side of that finger. If I turn my left hand sideways, like I'm going to shake somebody's hand, I felt a pain on the top edge of that finger near the joint where it hooks to the hand. And there was a sharp pain in that spot, and it was very painful. And so without thinking about it, I reached over with my left hand and squeezed the air above my finger, not knowing what happened or why I was doing it or without any. I wasn't thinking about it. I just did it, right? And when I did that, uh, what happened was it's like a blood squirted from that spot where I squeezed to the right from nowhere and was there for like maybe a half or a quarter of a second, and then it disappeared. And that was it. It was all done. The whole experience was finished. And then, but uh, after we left the park, my hand was in a little pain from whatever this was, and um, my hand swelled up to where it was 3 times its normal size. It was it was huge. It was totally swollen. So I went through. I searched around on Google um, for a doctor in that area that would have or not for a doctor, but for a 24-hour or a 7-day clinic that I could go to 7 days a week. They'll be open every day. A medical clinic that I could just walk in and get to see a doctor. And so I found one in Google, and it was just around. It was like 3 blocks from me. It was just around the corner, and there was an Iranian fellow who was a general doctor, general practitioner, had an office open 7 days a week. And I walked in there, and there was nobody in his office, and I rang the little bell that lets them know you're there. And the lady, his secretary, opened the little door and said, "Fill this out." Handed me the thing. I filled it out, and I went in and saw the doctor. And he looked at my hand, and I told him what happened. I said, I felt like something bit me, like a bug, like an astral bug. I don't know why I called it an astral bug, but that's what I called it because I figured something from the astral plane or something bit me. And I don't know if I described it that way when I talked to him, or maybe I just thought about it later. Anyway, I told him what happened. I said something bit me that I couldn't see, that was invisible, and while I was in the park. And I told him about squeezing that spot and the blood coming out and then disappearing. And then and he had these magnifying specs that were attached to his glasses, and he flipped them down over his glasses, and he looked at my hand, and he said, "Yeah, someone did bite you. I can see the puncture wounds on your hand." And so that was an astral being coming to the earth, just like the Skinwalker is an astral being that can exist on the physical world and the astral world that goes back and forth. And so, anyway, let my dog in again. He just has to go in and out, so I'm gonna let him in.
Okay. All right. Well, I figured let's take another a quick break for another announcement. So please keep in mind, questions and answers will be later on when we're done with this interview. Again, you can submit your questions on Skype, or I mean not Skype, on YouTube or Twitch in the chat, or you can ask a question of Mike directly. And if you simply join the Telegram group that's going on right now, there's the link for the Telegram group is in the description below, and you should. It usually doesn't take that long to install it, but if you do would like to talk to Mike directly, make sure you get it installed now, so you can do that later on at the end of the show. All right. Looks like we got Mike back.
Okay, so I guess that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about attaching spirits, other than, I could get into proving about, how they cause war and terrorism and crime and all these different things.
Yeah,
We
sure.
can go into that, or I can switch over to aliens and move on to another topic, which is your preference?
Well, I mean, let's Figured let's cover aliens, and there's always time later for the other things you mentioned. So let's do aliens, just so that some of those out there who were hoping to hear your aspects on that, they'll be good if you can go into that.
Okay, so on October 3rd, 1980, I had my first close encounter. I had come home from a party, and um, I was driving a brown Pontiac Le Mans, and I'd pulled into my mother's driveway, and I was sitting there. She had an inclined driveway. It was in the northwest corner of the city of Houston, Texas, and my windows rolled down, and I'm sitting there, and in the middle of my head, I saw a circle of lights spinning for maybe a quarter of a second, and um, the ring of lights um, came on in the middle of my head. It was an actual visual image, and it came on and moved slightly, and then disappeared. It was only on for about a quarter of a second, and then it did that like 3 or 4 times, and it would come on and it would spin, move just for the tiniest amount, and it would disappear. And like I said, it did that for 3 or maybe 4 times. And I had never seen anything in the middle of my head. No, I've never seen a visual image in the middle of my head, neither before that moment nor after. And so one time I was able to visualize colors, one time in my whole life. Other than that, I've never seen anything inside my head ever, except, well, those once when I was seeing with my third eye that I saw something in my head. But short of that, I've never been able to visualize inside my head. So me seeing something like that in the middle of my head was something kind of unusual for me. So I was like, what was that? And I thought about it for a few seconds, and then I just like kind of blew it off and continued thinking about committing suicide, because that's what I was thinking about at the time. And I was kind of paralyzed because I didn't really have the energy to move. And so I eventually, after a very long period of time, I opened the door, my left door, the driver's side door, and it took me quite a while to even get out of the car. But eventually I got out of the car, my windows were rolled down, and my door's open. I'm standing on the concrete driveway between the car and the door, and I turn around and look up in the sky, and what I saw in my head was sitting in the sky. It was a circle of, basically it was just a black hole with 8 equidistant lights on its edge, and there was no reason for the lights to even exist. And but I was seeing the craft from the side, not from the underneath. It was about, if I stuck my thumb out in front of me at arm's length, it was about the width of my thumb at arm's length. And I could see 3 lights, and then 4, then 3, then 4, and it kept going back and forth between 3 and 4 lights. And depending on the position the craft was in. And the first thought that came to my mind was I thought I was hallucinating. And so I was thinking, well, I'm just seeing, my mind is just making this up, right? It's not real. I'm just hallucinating, right? So I figured, well, if I did other things and then came back, it'd be gone because it's just hallucination, right? So I turn around, I roll up my window, lock the door, I get into my car on my knees, inch over to on my knees to the other side of the car, roll up my window on that side, on the passenger side, lock that door. I inch back on my knees, look over at the digital readout on the clock in the car, and it's exactly 11 o'clock. This is on October 3rd, 1980, exactly 11. And so I inch all the way out, and stand up and back up enough to shut the door. I shut the door and turn around and look up, and the craft is still sitting there. I'm like, okay, I guess you're not an hallucination. You must be real, is what I'm thinking. So it I always get mixed up whether it goes up or down first, but I'll just tell it one way, and if I told it a different way later on, somebody can correct me. But I think what happened was um, it rose like 2 degrees, and very slowly. It's spinning very slowly. It's also vibrating like a piece on a lathe that's off center, and it rises like um, 2 degrees and stops, and then hovers there, and then it descends twice as far as it rose, and stops and pauses there, and then it rises back up to where it originally was. Now, that could be the opposite way. It could have lowered first and went up twice as far and came back to the center. It did one way or the other. I can never remember which is which. But anyway, it's been too long. So I got the impression from it rising and falling that it was wanted to land. It wanted to leave, but it wanted to land first and then leave. And then thinking about that, I'm like, oh, you want to take me with you. Based on its movements, I came to the conclusion that it was wanted to take me with it to leave the planet for good. And since I was thinking about committing suicide, I figured, looking back, I was thinking that that's the reason why they came in the first place, because I was ready to commit. Because I was thinking about committing suicide, I was ready to leave the planet. That's what drew them to me, and because they knew I was ready to go, but I wasn't thinking about aliens. So anyway, I figured, based on their movements, they wanted to take me with them, and since I was ready to go, I said, "Oh, okay. So you want to land and take me with you and go?" And I said, "I'm ready to go. Let's do it. How do we do this?" That's what I'm saying to it in my head, based on my conclusions that are derived from its movements. So after I say to it mentally, "How do we do this?" what it does is it moves to the right. It stays horizontal. It's still spinning. It's still vibrating, and it's moving at an angle, a vertical angle of about a 45-degree angle up in the sky. But the craft is staying level while it's doing this. It's still spinning, still vibrating, and staying level, but the angle of movement is at a 45-degree angle up, and it moves up 2 or 3 degrees in the sky, and it's like it hits a point, and then it moves down at a 45-degree angle, and then it gets down to a point, and then it moves up at another 45-degree angle, and it does this all the way across the sky from where it was originally sitting till it's over in this field, which is west of where I'm standing. And so it does this all the way out into this field very slowly, and you could have taken a ruler and drawn a line across the edge of the top edge and the bottom edge of where it went down to and where it went up to, because the points at where it stopped up and down were exactly the same all the way across the sky. It was perfect control, and it went to the same height and the same depth each and every time in a very, very slow sawtooth pattern until it's over in this field, stops, and then does the same thing coming back to me until it's back in its original position. And when it gets back in front of me, I realize, oh, you want to go in the field and land out there, and then we can go. And I realize what it wants at that point because of its movements. Logically, making a logical conclusion from the movements. So, um, so I said, okay, let's do it. So I walk down my mother's driveway out to the center of the road where each side of the road is like not there are two different plates of concrete and they're not perfectly aligned in the center. So you can notice exactly where the center of the road is. And so I walk all the way to the center of the road, and I turn to the right, and I walk down the center of it's Colony Court was the name of the road, still is if they haven't changed it. And I walk down Colony Court, down the center of the road. And I look over at this thing, and it's staying directly level, even with me as I walk down the middle of Colony Court Road. And so I don't want this thing to gain any power over me or anything. So I don't focus on it while I'm walking. I look over at it, and then I look around at the sky and look around at other things, and I don't keep my attention on it while I'm walking. And as I'm walking, I'll look back over it occasionally, but I'm not really paying much attention to it. But it's paralleling my walk, staying exactly parallel with me the whole time. And so when I get to the part where Colony Court dead ends onto the street that allows you to get into that neighborhood, the entrance into the neighborhood, the street that allows you to get into that neighborhood that Colony Court T-bones into, I stop at that juncture of the road. And I look back up at the craft, and it's no longer. I'm not at this point looking at the craft from the side. I'm looking at it from underneath slightly, and I can see the whole circle at this point. And it's stopped in front of me. It's still spinning, still vibrating, but it's not moving towards the field that I'm moving towards any longer. It's stopped right in front of me. And what it does is it dips the front end of the craft down, and it lifts the back of the front of the craft up at the same time. So it's like somebody drew a horizontal line through the middle of the craft, and it's dipping the front and lifting the back, and then it goes in the other direction. It drops the back and lifts the front until the back is down and the front is up, and it's still spinning in a circle. So as it's spinning and dipping, it looks like an infinity sign, just like with the ghost that I mentioned earlier. And so, when I see this moving infinity sign, I think I'm like, maybe that's where I think in my head, maybe that's where the Egyptians got their infinity sign from. Maybe they encountered a craft like this one that does the same thing. So I have this thought, and it does this dipping, front and back, dropping the front, lifting the back, dropping the back, lifting the front, motion over and over 3 or 4 times, and then slowly starts going back to where it's level, and does it past center a couple times, and then finally levels off and stops doing it. And so at that point, I decide to keep moving, and I continue my walk towards this field. I walk across the street that Colony Court butts up against, that allows you to get into the neighborhood and the housing complex. I walk across that street, over the curb, and into the field, and it's still paralleling me to my left as I walk, and I get out into this field, and I get maybe 20, 30 foot out into this field, and I look back over at the craft, and it's now back to my side more than above me, and kind of basically the same position it originally was, and it keeps going. I stop in the field maybe 20 or 30 foot into the field, or maybe a little, 30, 40 foot into the field. I stop and it keeps going west, and then it for maybe 5 or 10 seconds, and it stops and it comes back in front of me. And I say to it in my head, I say, I'll leave with you. I'm fine with leaving this planet, but I want you to come down here. I don't want to go further out in the field where nobody will see you. I want somebody to see you when you land. And what I heard, it was like I was talking to myself. I didn't hear any special voice or anything. But what I heard was, they're not ready yet. And I said to them, well, if they're not ready yet, then I'm not ready yet. And I basically changed my mind about leaving at that moment. And so what it does is it drops about maybe 1 degree in the sky, and slows its vibration to where it stops the vibration. And it's still spinning, but it's no longer vibrating. It's like it's sitting on a surface and it no longer needs to vibrate. But for whatever reason, it's still spinning but not vibrating. And so at that point, this is one of those things that I have a hard time understanding, but there's a black dot where one of the lights was that comes around in front of me and on the side of the craft. And it's basically they've turned off one of the lights. And I still to this day do not know how I could see a black dot on a black surface in the middle of the night sky, but I could see the actual dot, and I don't know how I could see it, but it was a black dot on a black surface. And so it makes a full circle with the lights, and that same turned off light is there again, but there's a second turned off light behind the first one, and it makes another rotation around, and there's a third light turned off, and it makes another rotation around, and there's a fourth light turned off, and it keeps making rotations and turning off light, a single light with every rotation, until it gets to the 8th light. And when it gets to the 8th light, it's just no longer there. It's like it either fully cloaked or disappeared or went into another dimension or did something, because when it turns off that 8th light, it's not there anymore visually, and it's totally gone. And where it was sitting, there was 3 lights that are perfectly level with each other, that were within the space of the craft, that I couldn't see. They were behind the craft, but when it disappears, I can see those 3 stars, and they were like behind the craft. And so it's no longer there. It didn't shoot off or anything. It's either cloaked or went into another dimension or something, but it's no longer visually visible at that point. It's gone. And so I look around the sky, and what I can see is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yes, of course. Okay. Do you remember the do you remember any of the episodes of the original series?
Oh, no, I don't. To talk about with Kirk?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Okay. So there was an episode called Day of the Dove, and in that episode, there's these 2 guys that are fighting, and one of them is black on one side and white on the other side, and the other one is black on one side and white on the other side, but they're the opposite of each other. One is black on the left and one is black on the right, and it's like a black and white thing on the earth, like blacks and whites. It's 2 guys that are from a different tribe each, and they're fighting each other. And when they're fighting, it's like the universe is swapping with another universe, and you see the stars in the sky. All on this episode, all the stars blink, go off, and another different set of stars come on. So it's simulating visually two different universes interchanging with each other as they're fighting. And so when I look around the sky, I'm seeing something similar but different. And so that night, there were more stars out than I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen so many stars before or since. But within the space of a quarter, I could see like 10 to 15 to 20 stars within the space of a quarter that are a silver dollar. Very small space. There was a whole bunch of stars. There was that many stars all across the sky, right? And within that space of a silver dollar, all the stars within that space would go off at the same time. And a different set of stars within that same space would come on while the first set of stars went out, like they were changing place back and forth. And this was occurring independently in the space the size of a dollar, silver dollar, all across the sky, as far as I could see in every direction. There were stars going off in that big a space, and another set of stars coming on within that same space, independently of every other space in the sky. Okay, it was really bizarre. It's almost hard to explain, but it was very disorienting seeing this happen. And so I closed my eyes and I dropped to my knees and I just tried to get my bearing for a moment because it was kind of dizzying seeing all the stars doing this. And so I stand back up and I open my eyes, look around. It's still doing it. As far as I can see in every direction, this effect is occurring. And so I walk back to my mother's condominium, and I'm looking around, and as I'm walking, the stars are doing this weird thing in every direction as far as I can see. This wasn't occurring during the time I was walking with the craft or before. It was only happening after the craft disappeared. And so this strange effect in the sky is occurring from the moment the craft disappeared, right after it disappeared, till the moment I get to my mother's condominium driveway. Just before I walk, I'm not looking at the sky at this point. I'm just looking up and looking down, looking up. At the last minute, I look down, and then I'm about to walk up her driveway, and I look back up, and the sky is back to normal. It's all totally normal. And so I walk up the driveway, walk into her condominium, and I walk up stairs, and I walk in my mother's bedroom, wake her up, and tell her that I just saw a strange craft, and she thinks I'm temporarily crazy or whatever. She can't wrap her mind around this, event. I don't really go into it, the kind of detail I'm with you. I just told her very briefly that I saw something, and she of course thinks I'm, temporarily insane or something. So anyway, so it goes on from there, and I called the next day. This was like I think this was Saturday night, October 3rd, 1980. I think that was a Saturday night. And so the next day is a Sunday. The next day I call Ellington Air Force Base, and I say, have you guys seen anything unusual in the sky in the last few days? And oh, no, wait, wrong. I'm telling the story wrong. Okay, so when I call Ellington Air Force Base, it's a Sunday, right? This was a Saturday. The encounter was on Saturday night. The next day I call, it's a Sunday, right? So the person that picks up the phone says, well, you want to talk to us? I say something to the effect, have you seen anything? Or I don't remember exactly what I said, but the guy says, well, you want to talk to the people in the tower, and you can't get through to the tower because it's Sunday, and there's no switchboard to let you talk to the people in the tower on a Sunday. So you need to call back tomorrow on a Monday to talk to the people in the tower. I'm the guy in the fire department, and I can't switch you into the tower. And so I said, okay. And we both hang up. And so on Monday, the next 2 days after the event, I call back to Ellington Air Force Base and I say, have you seen anything last couple of days? And and the guy goes, no. Hold on a second. And he sets the phone down. Then he picks, and for a few seconds, he picks it back up and says, no, we haven't seen anything. What did you see, or where did you see something? And I told him where I was, and he said, hold on just a minute. He sets the phone down a second time, and I assume he got up out of his chair and walked over to the guy who was covering the radars that are looking at my area. And he comes back and picks up the phone. I expect him to say, no, we haven't seen anything. Sorry, bye. But that's not what he says. He goes, I'm sorry, but we're not allowed to talk about this subject at this time. And I'm like, excuse me? And he repeats it. He said, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to talk about this at this time. And I was like, you didn't see anything. You just put me on, right? And he repeats it, and he says the same thing like 3 times, totally straight faced and everything. And I'm like, if he was joking, he did a really good job of it, because he wouldn't deny and he wouldn't confirm. And so I said, okay, thank you very much, and hung up. And so after that, I wrote a letter to Omni Magazine, and I told them about the encounter and expected never to hear from them again. And so 6 months after writing to them about this encounter, they call me up and they say, this is back when a phone call from New York to Texas would be very expensive during the day. And so this lady says, I'm going to call you back at 11 o'clock at night when the rates are cheaper. And so, and so, okay. And then she hangs up, we hang up, and she calls me back later that night, 11 o'clock that night, and we get into this conversation. We talk when it's not, long distance is not free, even at 11 o'clock. And so we talked for like an hour or two. And at the end of this conversation, the lady tells me she's from Omni Magazine, and she says, we're gonna print your story. And I'm like, you're joking. And she goes, no, we're gonna print it. And but you need to call back in a couple of weeks to find out what issue it's going to be in. I said, why would you print my story? You have no proof that I'm not lying to you. And she goes, well, we know you're telling the truth. We're going to print it. And she, and so she hangs up, and I call back. She gave me her home phone number. So I called back a couple weeks later, like she said, and her husband picks up the phone. And I said, I asked him for his wife's, I said, is she there? And he goes, why are you calling? And I told him, because your wife told me to call. This is a story that she's covering, and she told me to call her at her house. And he goes, don't ever call this number again. And he was very angry. And I said, well, how am I supposed to reach your wife if this is the number she gave me and I have no other numbers for her? And he gave me her work number. And he said, call that number. Don't ever call this one. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And I hung up. And so I called this reporter at the Omni Magazine at her office, and her editor picks up the line. And I say, I tell her who I am and why I'm calling, and that I'm calling to find out what issue my story's going to be in. And she goes, well, we're not sure if we're going to print your story. And I'm like, what do you mean? She said, you guys are going to print it. And she goes, well, there's a lot of UFO stories out right now. There's too many, and we're not, we might not print it. He said, call back in a couple weeks, and I'll let you know if we're going to print it. And we hang up, and so I call her back in a couple weeks, and she goes, I'm sorry, we're not going to print your story. I asked her, I guess I kind of screwed up the story a little bit, but she originally I asked for the reporter, and she goes, well, she doesn't work here anymore. And I was like, what do you mean, you fired her? And so I said, and she goes, no, she still works for us, but she doesn't work at this facility anymore. So you can't talk to her here. And I say, well, her husband won't let me call her at the house, and you won't let me talk to her at work. So how am I going to talk to her if I can't get to her at work and I can't get to her at home? How am I going to talk to her? And she didn't care. She just like doesn't want me. Or she doesn't give me a different number for the reporter, and I can't call her at home, and I can't reach her at that location at work, and they're no longer going to print it. So I figured, well, I said to her the second time or one of the times I talked to the editor, I said to her, well, the government must have got to you too. And she goes, no, we're not sure if we should print it or not. She's him and hawing. I assume the government got to them and told them not to print it. So anyway, that was the first encounter and subsequent follow-up stuff that have to do with the first encounter. So after I had the first encounter, I was thinking, well, that I made a mistake, that I should have gone with them to leave the planet, and that I made a mistake by staying. So I started thinking, well, when might they return to come back to the, where I can see them again and have another chance to leave? And I thought about it, and I was like, I thought about the fact that the space shuttle was about to launch in 6 months. And, I was thinking like this right after, like the next day after the first encounter, and I started thinking about when I could actually get another chance to leave. Why would they return, and when would that be? And I thought about the space shuttle, that aliens might want to see us launch the first reusable spacecraft launched from Earth, being the shuttle, which is going to launch in 6 months. I figured, well, they might come back to see the space shuttle launch, and then I'd get another chance to go. And so I thought about my dad. My dad owned a couple pre-production fiberglass Corvettes that were put on the street before Chevrolet ever produced the first fiberglass Corvette. The first year was steel, and before the fiberglass came out in production, they had a couple pre-production prototypes driving around the street. My dad had somehow purchased at least one, and later a second of those. They're white, and probably they would be worth a fortune now if I had one of them and it was still in mint condition. So anyway, I thought about cops used to stop him and give him tickets without him speeding, even when he wasn't speeding. They'd give him a ticket just so that they could see the car, because nobody knew what it was. And the cops would give him a ticket just so they could see the car. And I thought about that, and I was thinking, well, the way I'll get on base to see the aliens return, to see the space shuttle launch, I'll do that by getting a unique vehicle like my dad's Corvette and drive it to the base. And the Yamaha was coming out with the Virago V-twin at that time. They had just started advertising on TV, and I hadn't even seen one on the street. So I figured I'll buy one of those and I'll park it I'll drive it down to Cocoa Beach, park it on the beach, and somebody with a ticket to get on base will walk over and look at the motorcycle and start talking with me and invite me on to the NASA base to see the first space shuttle launch. And then I'll get to see the aliens a second time. So that's what happened. I there's kind of a long series of things that happened between that thought and actually it occurring. But I eventually was in a position after my car, the one I just mentioned, was stolen. My brown Pontiac Le Mans was stolen. I took the money from it to buy an old Kawasaki 750, and I used that as a down payment on a Yamaha Virago V-twin 750, and I took it down to Cocoa Beach, parked it on the beach, and the guy walked over, started looking at it, asked me how I was going to watch the launch, and I said I had no idea. And he said, well, I've got a pass to get on base. You can ride with me on base, me and my family, and you can see the launch on base with us. And it worked out exactly like I expected. And so I'm following him and his family. They were in a station wagon with fake wood. They had those old woody station wagons that had a fake wood panel on the side. And we drove from the beach to Cocoa Beach to to Cape Canaveral Base and Cape Kennedy, or Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center, and John F. Kennedy Space Center. We parked. I parked the motorcycle outside the gate, got into the station wagon, and I think I was in the station wagon and riding along with these people, and there was the father of the kids was driving. His wife was back at the house with their infant and newborn, and he had I guess it was an employee of his or a friend or somebody, a young German kid, young early 20s, sitting in the passenger seat. And I was sitting in the second bench row behind the driver and on the right side, and his eldest boy and the girl were sitting to my left, and then behind me there was a 6-year-old boy sitting where you'd have luggage, but there was no luggage back there. And so as we're going on base, I start getting the idea to tell these people about my first close encounter, the one I just told you about. And so I start telling them that story. And actually, I'm telling this story wrong. So, okay, so we go on base, and we go all the way to where we park, and the launch of the shuttle, it gets to the countdown T-minus 10 seconds to launch, and they stop the countdown, and they freeze the launch. And then after an hour or two of the astronauts sitting in that space shuttle, they scrub the launch, and then they announce that they're going to relaunch. This was like on a Saturday, or I think it was actually on a Friday, and they announced that they're going to relaunch on like Monday or Tuesday of the next week, like 3 or 4 days later. It's like goes from Friday to Tuesday. And so the guy says to me, well, I didn't come here to go home without seeing the launch. I'm staying until they launch it next Tuesday in a hotel. I'm going to get a hotel down on Daytona Beach, and there's going to be a lot of women down there. Why don't you just go with us to hold on. Why don't you just go with us and hang out in the hotel room and check out all the women, and then we'll come back on Tuesday and see the launch. And I said, that sounds great. I'm not going home either until the launch, so that sounds great. I'd love to hang out in your hotel room until the launch on Tuesday. And so I followed him in his station wagon from Cape Canaveral to or Kennedy Space Center / Cape Canaveral to Daytona, and I lose them on the way, and I have to find them on the beach. It's kind of a long story. Eventually, I find them on the beach, and then we go to the hotel room, and he lets me sleep in his hotel room while they're out doing things outside. And I sleep for pretty much the whole time. I had stayed awake for like 3 days straight to get from Houston to Cape Canaveral in the shortest amount of time. I just stayed awake that for the amount of time it took me to get from Houston to Cape Canaveral. I stayed awake all but about, I think I slept one night during that whole travel, and the rest of the time I was just on the road. And so I slept from the first attempted launch almost all the time till the second attempted launch. And so we go back, and I follow him back from Cape Canaveral, from Daytona Beach to Cape Canaveral, and we park outside the gate of the base, just like the first time. And I get in their car, station wagon, a second time, and go on base. It's like 5:30 in the morning. It's very dark. There's no moon out, and the second time we go on the base, I have the idea I should tell them about my first encounter, like I was about to tell you a while ago. I almost got the story out of kilter, but I didn't tell them the first time we went on base. I told them the second time we went on base for the actual launch. And so I tell them the whole story just like I told you. And the second I finished telling them the story, just like I told you, I spit out the last word, and the German kid in the passenger seat laughs at me. He doesn't believe the story I just told you at all. So he laughs, and in my head I say to God, God, I wish you would show them. I say this mentally in my head as he's laughing. I say, God, I wish you would show them what you showed me. And within a second or 2 or 3 seconds of my wish in my head, out in front of the car is another craft looking exactly like the one I just told you about. It's black. It's like a black hole, no surface, no reflection of light. It's absorbing all light. Eight equidistant lights around the edge. It's exactly identical to the first craft that I mentioned. It was like an answer to my prayer, exactly. And the only difference is that it was slightly lower, and it was not vibrating. And we're looking at it from the side, just like the first time. It's way out in front of the car, and we're going around a left curving causeway road. And it is a little bit lower than the first craft. If he had stopped the car underneath the craft, we go under it. We drive directly under this thing, but it's about somewhere between 30 to 50 feet above the left curving causeway road, and it's right in the middle of the road, 30 to 50 feet off the road, and we drive straight underneath the craft, and the windows on this station wagon are curved out, and so I stick the top of my head against the out curving window and look straight up, and when we're underneath this thing, I can see the edge of the craft spinning because it's bigger than the width of the car, and it's probably if you take a highway that goes in one lane each direction, and then the runoff on the side, and then a little bit beyond that, this craft wasn't much bigger than that. It might have been a little bit bigger than that, but not much. And so If I'd have got out of the car, I could have hit this thing with a rock. It was that low. And with a rifle, for sure, I could have shot it. And um, so we drive, well, before we get to this craft, I'm looking around, and what I know, first thing I notice before we even reach the craft is that when it first appears, the kid in the front right passenger seat says to the driver, the father of the kids, he says, maybe that's what he saw. And the driver goes, yeah, maybe that is what he saw. They both acknowledge that they see it and that it's sitting there. And then after they say those two sets of words, immediately after they say that, it's like their brains are suddenly changed to where they no longer care that it's sitting there. They're not staring at it, they're not gawking at it, they don't care about it anymore. They acknowledge its presence, and then it's like they forget about it. And so as this is occurring, right after he says that, I'm looking around, and the kids, the two kids, the young girl and young boy, older boy, sitting to my left, it's like Batman's Mr. Freeze has shot them with the freeze ray. They are absolutely, and the youngest kids, the 5 or 6 year old in the back seat, or younger than that maybe, they're all frozen. They're not moving a muscle. They're not moving their eyeballs, not their physical body, nothing. They're absolutely frozen, all 3 kids. Now the adults, the young boy, the young 20-something passenger, and the driver, they're all totally normal, but they don't care that it's sitting there. They're not gawking at it or doing anything in reference to it after acknowledging its presence. And so we drive under this thing. I look up at it with my head against the window. We drive past it. I look back. It's behind us, still turning, spinning, and not vibrating. And we keep going around the Causeway Road until we get to a point where the trees block my vision of my view of the craft. So it's blocked out by the trees. So that's 2 of my encounters, and I had another one in Peru. That was very long encounter also.
Well,
I went to.
Mike,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask, these other things that you wanted to cover, what causes all these other things you were reading off on your list. Is there something you can go into that, and is there a correlation? Are you saying that this is all those things that you listed off? Is that more of a correlation to attaching spirits or to aliens particularly?
Well, what I was going to go over, the potential path that I could go with this conversation, really doesn't have anything to do with aliens. It has to do with attaching spirits. However, if you let me go to my counter in Peru, I will tie it all in a little better with a slightly nearer bow. But if you want, I'll go down that path. Attaching spirits are more important to discuss because they cause all of the problems on this planet. And I can go into your kind of proving or giving pieces of information that from my experience and other pieces of knowledge that kind of prove that attaching spirits cause the problems on this planet. But the attaching spirits don't directly relate to the aliens in any way, shape, or form. The only there is another path we could also go down. I'd mentioned earlier about why not do that instead. So Remember I mentioned earlier about being bitten by the astral bug, the
Yes.
invisible astral bug. I mentioned the Skinwalkers on Skinwalker Ranch being astral beings that come to the earth and go back to the astral plane, that sort of thing. Okay, that's sort of like aliens, right? Okay, but however, um, I as a hypnotherapist, I had a client who was used as a breeder for the Greys, and I mentioned her earlier about the 72 encounters and all that. Well, I'm going to go back to her just for a moment because it kind of ties into all this. So, with the astral uh, entities coming to Earth, and that ties in with the aliens too. So, anyway, when she was 9 years of age, the aliens, when they first abducted her, she was 9, and they injected her with some kind of growth hormone that allowed her to mature sexually at a younger age than she would normally mature sexually, right? So, but before they abducted her the first time at the age of 9 to give her that injection, um, she had an encounter with what she called astral demons. That was her description. I'm not saying they're demonic or they're actual demons. I'm saying that was the phrase she used to describe them, probably because they looked hideous. Okay. So she was in a room on her when she was 9 years of age before she got abducted by the Greys, and these three or four of these beings, what she called astral demons, appeared in the room she was in just out of nowhere. They just materialized, and they started to attack her. And there was like an invisible barrier in the room she was in that she couldn't see the barrier. But when they went to attack her, they ran up against this barrier and they couldn't get through the barrier to attack her. And then they disappeared. And what she figured out was, just logically speaking, was that the Greys must have created the barrier that kept the astral demons from attacking her because she was going to be their breeder. And she figured out that she had 55 offspring that the Greys had. Uh, they would take an egg out of her, and they would walk over to a petri dish sort of thing, and take her egg and put a sperm of a gray in her egg, and stick it back in her body, and then fly around until they figured that it had attached to her fallopian wall and would survive, and then they'd put her back in her bed, and they would let the um, they would let the offspring grow in her womb for 10 weeks. That's what we figured out. It was 10 weeks. It's not, she was thinking it was like 6 weeks or 12 weeks, 2 months or something like that. And we figured out at some point, I had 4 sessions with her, and we figured out that that they would come back in 10 weeks to get to extract the fetus. And so, but the astral demons that tried to attack her, that the Greys kept from attacking her, those were just like the astral bug that bit me, and just like the skinwalker that's in the form of a wolf that all of a sudden disappears in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of a field. Its tracks just suddenly stop when somebody's tracking it, and it's nowhere. It's just materialized. It's gone back into the astral plane, and the astral bug that bit me, and the astral demons that tried to attack her, and the Greys that stopped the astral beings that tried to attack her. So those are all astral beings coming to the earth. And sometimes the astral beings don't have the same, if they run up against the Greys, maybe the Greys have a little more power than the astral beings. So, there's all this power play between different sets of beings that all want you for different reasons. And so anyway, that's the only way I can tie the astral beings with the aliens. I can't tie the demons with the aliens, except in the sense that um, So the rumor floating around is that the aliens are not going to ever save our rear end. We're either going to break out of our shell and become a full-fledged class 0 or class 1, depending on who you listen to, society where we have space, you know, very good space travel, not rockets, but, you know, like the aliens have. We're either going to develop our own way off this planet, stop our wars, stop our crimes, stop our um, poverty, stop our starvation, stop our wars. We're either going to stop all the stuff that the attaching spirits are causing, and then if we can stop these things, then we'll become this class 0 society, and then we will be welcomed into the larger race of beings that's around, that are in this part of the galaxy. But if we don't stop all that problems that the attaching spirits are causing, then we'll die off again, and the aliens are not going to come save us. So that's how it's all tied in together, in the sense that if we don't go down the road that I'm suggesting and prove that attaching spirits, A, are real, scientifically prove they're real, B, you know, invent technology that can see them, C, figure out a common, easy way to remove them. You know, there's a rumor that after you pass on to the other side, they take you to a place where they're washed off of you. And I've heard stories where people are abducted and they're taken to a particular planet or spaceship, or like a spaceship, and they can't go into the spaceship because they first have to go through a some type of cleansing device that removes your, what they call, immoral implants. That's the attaching spirit. So the aliens don't want the dark spirits around them either, so they'll take them off of you just so they can be around you for a little while. And you know, the guy who saw my attaching spirit that sits on my back, that I was in the jail cell with, he was an exorcist in a past life, and he uh, would take people and stake them down, and he would take the salt and make a circle around them, and he would sanctify the space in the middle of the circle, in the middle of the salt, where the person is staked down who's possessed, and he would sanctify that ground, and then he would force the demon out of the person into a crystal ball. And he would, and there was one time where he did that, and when the demon came out of the person, it literally blew out the stomach out of this person. It exploded their stomach, and all their entrails went on the ground. They had just sanctified. And so when the demon went into the crystal ball that he forced the demon into, it still had some power because the ground inside the circle had been desanctified by the entrails falling on the ground after the demon exploded out this person's stomach and was forced into the crystal ball. So the demon inside the crystal ball then exploded this crystal ball and went into this. His name was Jason, my cellmate. It went into him, and he that was like 3 or 4 lifetimes ago. And when he ends an incarnation, and then he goes into the light, well, the demon can't go into the light, so it just drops off in the astral plane. And then, you know, Jason goes into the light as whatever personality he was in that incarnation, and he's in the light. Then he takes another incarnation. He comes back to Earth, so he travels through all these different planes of existence back to Earth. He has to go through the astral plane. Well, the demon's still waiting there in the astral plane. It attaches back to him before he gets into his next body. So it's with him for like 3 or 4 incarnations. It keeps hanging out in the astral plane and attaching to him every time he comes back to get another body. So he's had this one attaching spirit for like 3 or 4 lifetimes. And that's another way, you know, that anyway, I'm kind of expanding out my knowledge about these things from different areas that I've been part of. But you can't, the way it's all tied together is if mankind does not come to the understanding that most people have attaching spirits and they're causing all these, I'm going to get into this proof stuff for a minute because I need to in order to round this circle of understanding. So back when Art Bell had his show on, there was a girl who called in, and I was listening to the show live one night. This girl calls in, and she says, "My name is such and such. Do you remember me?" And he goes, "No. Who are you?" And she goes, "I'm the psychic who told you where your watch was." And what had happened was he had climbed up on his roof to fix his antenna, and he had gotten all sweaty, and he came down off the roof, and he came into his house, and he had taken off his watch, stuck it in a drawer, took a shower, and then he couldn't remember where he stuck his watch. So on the air, he asked his callers to, he said, "Oh, I know some of you people out there are psychic. When you psychics, call in and tell me where my watch is." So this girl calls in and tells him where his watch is, and she did that on the show before I had heard her, and then when I heard her, she was calling back a second time, and explains to him that she had called the previous time, told him where his watch was, and he had opened the door, found his watch, and she was accurate as a psychic. And then after she tells him this on the second call, the one I heard, she goes, these school shootings?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, my psychic, whatever, the guys that tell me things, they're telling me that these school shootings are causing by the influence of dark forces." So basically, she's saying that the school shootings are caused by attaching spirits, and the school shootings are terror. So that tells you that terrorism is caused by attaching spirits. That's an example. The school shootings are a form of terror, just like any other type of terrorist act. And so that's your terrorism caused by attaching spirits. And if I'm going to tell you one more thing real quick before we finish the proof, unless I come up with something else. I'd like to read you a short quote from, did you ever see the TV series The Dead Files with Amy Allen?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so there's a TV series. You can still watch it on various means through YouTube and other methods. You can still see it if you want to. But this lady's one of the most accurate psychics who's ever lived, and she has a partner who's a retired New York police detective, Mr. Duchovny, and they're having this conversation about war, and they're in, I can't remember if they were in Texas or somewhere else in the Southwest, and this paragraph I'd like to read is a conversation between this psychic and her New York retired police detective. Is it okay if I read it?
Sure.
Okay. So this is The Dead Files in 2011. It's season 6, episode 6. And the episode is called The Dark One, Abilene. So I guess it's Abilene, Texas. So here it goes. But, and I quote, "But the Germanos," this is the Indians, "the Germanos occupied this land when the Spanish first showed up. So they were here until probably about the early 1700s. Early 1700s, Plains Indians then come in and displace the largely pedestrian Germanos." Wow. I've never heard of Indians displacing each other. This was a blood feud. So how bloody of a battle are we talking about? If you're a fallen warrior, you can expect to have your corpse mutilated. They cut off hands, cut off fingers. Really? Very brutal. And then the Apaches are driven out by the Comanches. Goes for 100 years. So we're talking from the mid 1700s, yeah, all the way into the early 19th century. I mean, they fought the Apaches hammer and tongs. I mean, they never gave up fighting the Apaches until the very, very end. Geez, they scalp people. They'd eat liver sometimes. If they could make you scream or beg for mercy, that's the ultimate power. These guys sound like not somebody you want to mess with, right? How do the white settlers wind up dealing with it? Well, the settlers were on the losing end for several decades. I mean, really, the Comanches ruled the roost out here from about 1770 to about 1870. There's a lot of anonymous dying in this part of the world. There's a lot of panic. This old dude is talking. He's like saying there's all of these wars that happen, and he's talking about the Native Americans. Well, like with the Native Americans, I just see them like fighting, and then I just see them dead. I see their blood on the ground. There's other people later. So I keep seeing like different groups of people over time, and they're just dead on the ground bleeding. So what I'm thinking is that this thing is causing it. It's like instigating it and fueling it. Yes, yes. This is Amy Allen and Steve Dischiavi of the American TV series Dead Files talking about how the intra-tribal warfare of the American Indian was caused by disincarnate forces. So that's your attaching spirits causing war. So that's probably, I have a feeling that Mr. Putin has some attaching spirits, and that's why he's having his people kill all the Ukrainians, because he's got some influences influencing him to do so. Anyway, that's war. I've given you terrorism caused by attaching spirits. I've given you war caused by attaching spirits. Now I'm going to do one more because it's easy. Back to Art Bell. Okay, so one night there's a former bank robber who calls into Art Bell, and I heard this live also. This bank robber had succeeded for robbing banks for many years. And then they caught him one day and ended up in prison. And in his cell, he's telling this story live on the air with Art Bell, right? He said in his cell, his cellmate was writhing around on the floor. And his cellmate started begging this former bank robber to give him an exorcism. And they argue over the issue. Then the former bank robber finally gives in and goes, okay, I'll do something. You know, he just makes something up. And it works. He said that the cell turned very dark and strange after the spirits came out of his cellmate's body. And after he tells this story, Art asks him, how many prisoners in prison have attaching spirits? What do you think? And his answer came back was 100%. So that's your crime. Okay. And oh, I'm going to do speeding. Here's one last one I'm going to do. Okay, so I was in Austin, Texas, and I drove to a ghost hunters meetup group. Okay, and I got there late because I had a hard time finding the place. And I walk in, and this lady is standing in front of a podium. It's a young lady. She's like 23 or something, and she's talking about demons. And it's the conversation is supposed to be about ghosts, right? And I walk in. She's already started a conversation, or a speech, I should say. And I walk past her, and the only seat available is on the opposite side of the room. It's a big circle. And I walk over and I sit in this one empty chair, and I listen to her. She's talking about demons, and she starts talking about this lady who's actually sitting to her left, or it's to her right the way I'm looking, but as she's looking, it's to her left. This lady's sitting down, and the lady's daughter is sitting next to her. And this lady sitting there is a witch, and her daughter is a witch. And together, they conjure a demon. And the ghost hunter is talking about this lady and talking about the demon that she had conjured as a witch, and the demon's in her house or apartment, and they call the ghost hunter, and they're wanting to get this demon out of their dwelling. They conjured it, but they don't know how to get rid of it. So the ghost hunter As she's telling the story, she says she goes over to their, she doesn't believe in demons, right? She's a skeptic. And she goes over to the dwelling just to see if there's anything in there that, is there really a demon or not? What's there? She doesn't expect to experience this demon, but she walks into their dwelling, and the minute she walks in, this thing attacks her. And and I don't remember all of what it does to her, but um, after she finishes telling the story, she stops talking, and the crowd starts asking her questions. And when everybody in the crowd stops asking her a question, the room goes silent, and I start asking her questions. And so I say to her, the only question I ask her that I remember that is of any note that is relevant is I ask her, I say, of all the symptoms that the demon inflicted upon you, which one lasted the longest? Which symptom lasted the longest? And you'll never guess the word she said. Go ahead, guess. What do you think the one word she said? What was the word? What symptom was it?
Headache?
Nope. Speeding.
Oh,
She
like
said,
speeding, car speed. Using a
yes.
car?
And
Okay.
I said to her, I was a skeptic, and I said to her, speeding, everybody speeds. How can you tie this demon to speeding? Because I didn't believe her. And she goes, well, I don't speed. And I'm like, oh, okay. She says, I've never sped. I didn't speed before I walked into this place. And for 2 weeks after I left that dwelling, I sped around. And then it wore, the symptom wore off, and I went back to normal, and I stopped speeding. I never sped before. I sped around for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I stopped speeding. I went back to normal. So what I'm telling you is that speeding is caused by attaching spirits, and everybody speeds. 99% of the U.S. public speeds. So that's another crime that's caused by attaching spirits. And I'll stop on my already gave you backaches, headaches, speeding, war, terrorism, um, and I could give you a bunch more, but it's a logical place to stop on the symptoms and what attaching spirits cause. But basically, they cause all the problems on this planet, and if we don't acknowledge their presence and their influence upon us and prove scientifically they exist and figure out a way to get rid of them while we're here, then we're not going to get rid of the war. We're not going to get rid of the crime. We're not going to get rid of the poverty. And so the human race will die off, and the aliens will never come down and interact with us and make us be a part of the larger community. That's how it's all connected. So there's all your connections.
Well, Mike, so would you, what do you think if we open this up for some Q&A so that, because you talk for, quite a length, I'm pretty sure if there's people having questions, they've just been, tapping their fingers waiting for a chance.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so so I guess for everyone watching, we're going to get into Q&A now. So to give all of you a chance to submit your questions or to join on Telegram to ask question that way, I'm going to ask another question of Mike, and hopefully they'll give you enough time to submit your questions. So the question I had, Mike, regarding contact itself, do you have you had any experiences since the initial two, and then you didn't get into the you said Peru?
Okay, so I'll go over if you want, I'll go over the Peruvian encounter
Yeah, just
briefly.
just briefly, because then they'll be waiting again to be able to ask you a question.
Well, we were standing outside the backside of this big thatched hut, this huge building that we lived in, and and one of the guys I was standing there with two or three other men and one woman, and it was at least three other men, one young guy. One of them looked up and saw this craft, and and it's a very long encounter. But basically, we all three of us saw it, and there was a lady there that she was the therapist for the young boy, or younger boy, I should say, one of the people that saw it, and she wouldn't come over and look at it. She was just like the guys in the car. She didn't care if there was an alien craft up in the sky or not. She wasn't going to come and look. And anyway, that's a very long encounter, which I won't go through because you want me to answer more questions. But the answer is yes, I've had other encounters.
Sorry, I'm at the same time I'm trying to type up a message for everyone else in chat while you were talking. Let me see here. I guess I can tell them too. So, do you regarding because I know that you only mentioned one correlation regarding the aliens and attaching spirits, and that's the only one that you could draw if I didn't understand you correctly. But do you ever consider, for example, some of these actions that we take as attaching spirits to actually be alien in nature?
Well, the other connection between aliens and attaching spirits is some attaching spirits are aliens. So you have, um, I didn't get into it, but there's a book called Return from Tomorrow written by a guy named with the name of George Ritchie, and it's basically a very long out of body experience, um, and in that out of body experience, this guy's taken to a bar where men are competing to see how quickly they can get drunk, and he sees ex-humans that are dead, ghosts that liked being drunk while they're alive, who are now a ghost, and they still want to get drunk, so they're hanging out in bars waiting for guys to get pass out from getting drunk, so they can get in and attach themselves to that human. So it's basically humans attaching to humans. So some attaching spirits are human, ex-human, ghosts. Some are demonic, like mine. Some are alien. There's a book called Close Encounters of the Demonic Kind, something like that, um, which talks about aliens attaching to people. So some attaching spirits are aliens, some are ghosts, some are demons, some are earth spirits. Mine are called, the one in my head was described as an imp. An imp is, if you look up imp and wiki, it's both describe, an imp is described as a small demon or a earth spirit. So it could be an earth spirit or a demon. And so you've got earth spirits that are very dark and earth spirits that are not so dark. And so you have earth spirits that can attach, you've got ghosts, you've got demons, you've got aliens. These can all be attaching spirits. So that's another connection between aliens and attaching spirits, because some attaching spirits are aliens. And they've had a number of hypnotherapists who've uh, been clearing people with hypnotherapy, and they'll start talking to an alien, and it's an alien they're attaching, not a demon, not a human, not something else, but an alien. And so aliens can be attaching spirits. So there's another connection.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So one of the questions from Edward Sosa is, "Hey Charles, what do you think of Charles Upton work?"
Charles Upton. Oh, um, I vaguely know who he's talking about, but I think I've listened to one of his talks. If you want to remind me what he's about, I'll make a better answer, because I do remember listening to him. Somebody interviewed him recently, and I watched that interview, but I don't remember what he was talking about.
Well,
Do you?
I'm not familiar with him either, but Edward, if you can maybe write up something real quick and just explain who Charles is, so I can then maybe refresh Mike's memory.
Well, I mean, I can Google it and tell
Oh, for a
you.
second, I was like, "Oh, you went dark." Okay, you're still here.
Yeah, hold on a second. Uh, I can tell you what he's about if I get. Let's see. I should probably go to YouTube and YouTube it, not Google it, because
Edward
I
says
watched.
aliens. He's about alien and demons. I don't know if that helps.
He's right. The guy I did remember watching. I've got an image of him on my computer now. So
Okay. Can you please have another screen up that has more light because you're pretty dark now. Because
hold on.
initially I think you had your computer screen was on something brighter.
Better.
Yeah, it's a bit of a harsh shadow now.
Uh, hold on.
I guess do you have dark mode
What's
on?
that?
Did you have dark mode on your computer?
No, I just brought it. I Googled uh, Charles Upton, and
Okay,
it.
that works. We got you back again.
All right. All right. So um, I remember listening to him talk about demons and aliens, and I don't remember his message. I remember he does talk about both of them, but I don't remember what he said. It must not have impressed me much. But if the actual gist of what he says, if I knew that, then I could comment on what I thought about his what he's saying much more intelligently. I do remember he talked about aliens and demons, but I don't remember exactly what he said, honestly.
Right. Okay.
The problem with a lot of people who talk about various different things, whether it's aliens or demons, is that they base their information on religion and not facts. And I'm not saying religion is total BS. I'm just saying that there's a lot of things in the Bible that aren't true. Like for instance, it tells you that you should be nice to your slaves. Well, that's implying that God is okay with slavery, which I don't believe. So if God is not okay with slavery, then why would he tell you to be nice to your slaves if he's not okay with slavery? So you get my drift. I think that a lot of the Bible is the Moors of that day, and you know the Moors change. There was a time in human history where if you weren't married by the age of 14, you were considered over the hill. Well, today 14 is a crime.
Hmm.
Back then 14 was you need to be married by 14 because you die by the age of 30. Lifespan was short. So it was okay to marry early because you didn't live that long. Today we live much longer life, so we've arbitrarily decided that 18 is when it's legal. So the mores change because the circumstances change. And a lot of what's in the Bible is the mores of that day. And like, for instance, now you're not supposed to have more than one wife. Well, there are many people, and there were kings. King David was one of God's favorites, and he had quite a few wives. So, mores change, and the idea of what is proper and not proper changes. And if you base your views of reality on a book that's set in a particular time frame of history, then that limits your understanding to the understanding of those days, which is limited, very limited in itself. So I'm not speaking about Charles Upton because I don't really know what he said. I don't remember what he said because it didn't impress me. But I'm not sure if he said aliens were demons or I can tell you along those lines. Do you know who Daryl Sims is?
Sounds familiar, but I don't think I could speak about him.
Okay, so Daryl Sims is Houston UFO Network. He's called the Alien Hunter, and he's an abductee, and uh, he was actually the therapist for my client before I saw her. She was a previous client of his, but he lived in Houston or lives in Houston, and he's um, always talking about how the aliens are pretty much all evil there he doesn't. Um, what he says is that on very rare occasions, when you're on a craft, an angel will actually appear on the craft on very rare circumstances. And he says, believe me, how was he putting it? He said he was, I don't know if it was him or somebody else was on a craft, and the aliens were all around, and all of a sudden this demon comes in, and then after the demon, it was a lady. It was a lady he was talking about. He said that this girl was talking about. She was surrounded by all these different aliens, and then this demon came in, and then all of a sudden an angel came in right after the demon and stood by her, and then the demon took a hike real quick, and the aliens ran around and was hoping the angel wasn't going to basically obliterate them, and so basically he ties the aliens with the dark side, and um, and but he also says that he met Christ when he was young, and um, he doesn't claim to be religious, but he does have a sort of religious bent in his um, in his views about aliens. So, some people think that aliens are all demons, some think that they're all evil, and he's like one of those people who doesn't think they're demons, but he thinks they're very dark and not positive. He doesn't believe there's good aliens and bad aliens. He thinks they're all bad, and they're all working together, and they do work together. But um, I'm not going to go in with him and say they're all evil, they're all dark, or whatever. I think that duality exists beyond the earth, and that aliens can be just like humans. There's, on Earth, there's Jeffrey Dahmer's and there's Mother Teresa's. So are humans evil? Yes. Are they saints? Yes. Are they in between? Yes. It's all yes. So, and this is, we're just talking one race here. So it's the same with all the other races too. They got individual personalities, and they all have, there's different agendas even within one race, within a single race, and there's an unlimited number of races, just like there's an unlimited number of stars.
Okay. Well, Mike, thanks very much. It seems like everyone else just wants to watch and not necessarily take a chance to ask you a question. But even if someone is watching this afterwards, of course, in the description below, Mike has his website and all this other information. So I certainly hope you contact him there or submit some questions or just check out anything else he has to offer. So, Mike, I figured, this is a good stopping point, and I thought maybe just as a conclusion, if there's something that you would like to finish off with a final message.
Well, the one thing we didn't talk about was mind control. And if you want in the future, if you want to have me on a second time, I can spend quite a while talking about that, because I went through an experience that lasted a week, and it was all mind control stuff. And that's another topic, and it takes a while to go through all that information. So if you want, down the road, we can have another one and talk about that. Beyond that, I would say that I hope people at some point take heed of my message about attaching spirits causing all these different problems on Earth, and that we move forward in that dream that I'm hoping we can move forward in, instead of going the way we have several times already. So that's my message.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks for that. So let me just address the audience real quick. Don't hang up on me, and then we'll chat a little after. So everyone else watching, thanks very much for joining us. Again, all Mike's information is in the description below. And next week, I'm going to have Sherry Wild on, and I've already pre-scheduled some other interviews. I can't, the only time I can do them is pretty much for this month only on Fridays. Anything else in the future, just check out the channel and you'll see who's coming up and what's going on. So, Mike, thanks again. Everyone else watching, thank you for joining us, and catch you all later.